Useless. That's what she's always been. My mother set it into a standing microphone at the center of the ballroom, her voice carrying cleanly through the speakers. The chandeliers above us hummed softly, and the room, 83 guests, I counted later from the seating chart, went very still before a few people at table 6 laughed too quickly, like they thought it was a joke they were supposed to understand. It wasn't. A waiter paused beside me with a tray of champagne flutes, his wrist hovering in the air. I didn't move. My name is Hannah Carter. I was 32 years old that night, and I had personally secured the $187,000 pledge that was about to fund my brother's entire charity expansion. They didn't know that. They had no idea what was about to happen next. My family has always preferred things that photograph well. Clean lines, neutral colors, smiles that hold for exactly 3 seconds longer than they should. The kind of smiles that stay fixed even after the camera flash fades, like no one is sure when it's safe to relax. We grew up in Westport, Connecticut, in a 5-bedroom colonial with white siding that my mother had repainted twice in the same year because the undertone felt too warm. The front lawn was measured. She actually measured it once, I remember, 42 acres and edged with low boxwoods trimmed into exact rectangles every May and September. Inside, everything had a place, and if it didn't belong. My father, Richard Carter, ran a mid-sized financial advisory firm he liked to call boutique, though it managed just under $94 million in client assets the year I left for college. He wore navy suits even on Saturdays. He spoke in numbers, returns, percentages, timelines. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. My mother, Diane Carter, managed the rest. Schedules, appearances, relationships. She chaired 3 committees at the Westport Arts Council and could recite donor lists from memory, down to the exact amounts and which names required a handwritten note versus a printed one. Then there was my brother. Ethan Carter was 2 years younger than me, which somehow never mattered. He was the center of everything before he had even done anything to earn it. My mother used to say he had presence. Like that explained the way people rearranged themselves around him. He started his nonprofit at 26. On paper, it was clean. Youth mentorship, educational access, quarterly reports with polished infographics and photos of smiling kids holding backpacks. The launch gala alone raised $312,400, most of it from my parents' network. I remember the exact number because I built the donor database that tracked every pledge, every follow-up email, every tax receipt. I was never listed anywhere, not on the website, not in the printed programs stacked near the ballroom entrance, not even in the internal documents that circulated among the board. I worked quietly. That was the agreement no one ever said out loud. I handled logistics, vendor contracts, seating charts calibrated down to who had fallen out with whom in the last 6 months. I could tell you which donor preferred sparkling water with lime and which one would send back a glass if the ice cubes were too small. I was the one who noticed when a check was off by $2,000 and fixed it before anyone else saw. I was the one who stayed after events, heels in my hand, peeling off name tags from empty tables while the cleaning staff vacuumed around me in slow, practiced lines. No one asked me to. It was just understood because in our family, visibility wasn't tied to effort, it was assigned. And mine had already been decided. It didn't start at the gala. It started years earlier, in smaller rooms with fewer people, where the words didn't echo but they stayed longer. At my college graduation, there were 214 names printed in the program. Mine was one of them. Bachelor of Science in Information Systems, cum laude. I remember the paper stock, thick, slightly textured, the kind that leaves a faint dust on your fingertips. My parents sat in row H, seats 11 and 12. When my name was called, my father clapped twice. Measured. My mother smiled, the same 3-second version she used for photos. Then she leaned toward the woman next to her and said, not quietly enough, Ethan's already interviewing with 3 firms. He won't need to rely on something like this. Something like this. I heard it from the stage. The microphone carried more than just names. Afterward, in the parking lot, heat rising off the asphalt in visible waves, my mother adjusted the collar of my blouse and said, "You look nice. Simple suits you. Simple." I took a job in Boston 2 weeks later. Entry-level system dollars a year, health insurance that kicked in after 90 days, and a desk that faced a window with a partial view of a brick wall. I kept spreadsheets for everything. Rent, $1,450. Utilities averaged $112. Groceries, if I was careful, stayed under $240 a month. I tracked it all in a file labeled Q1 haul, then Q2, Q3, Q4. 4 tabs per year. I didn't ask for help. Back home, Ethan announced his nonprofit over dinner. There were 9 people at the table that night. My parents, me, Ethan, 2 of my mother's friends from the Arts Council, and a couple I didn't recognize who turned out to be early donors. He stood at the head of the table, one hand resting on the back of his chair like he was already used to addressing a room. "We're targeting underserved communities," he said. "Access gaps in educational resources. Mentorship pipelines." Pipelines. My father nodded like he was listening to a quarterly earnings call. "How much are you projecting for year one?" he asked. "Conservatively? $250,000. My mother's eyes lit up in a way I had never seen directed at anything I had done. "That's wonderful," she said. "We can make calls. There are people who would love to be part of something like this." I was still there, sitting 3 seats down, my plate untouched. No one asked what I thought. 2 months later, I was back in Westport on a Friday night, sitting at the same dining table, laptop open, building Ethan's donor tracking system from scratch. I created categories: pledged, confirmed, follow-up needed, high priority. I color-coded everything: green for secured funds, yellow for pending, red for risk. Ethan leaned over my shoulder at one point, the smell of his cologne. Something sharp, citrus-heavy, cutting through the room. "Can you make it look less technical?" he asked. "Donors don't like feeling like they're in a spreadsheet." I stared at the screen for a second. "It's an internal system," I said. "Yeah, but still. Presentation matters, so I redesigned it. Softer colors, cleaner layout. I added a dashboard with summary visuals he could screenshot and send in emails. He used those screenshots in his first investor pitch. He didn't mention where they came from. At the launch gala, there were 146 guests. I know because I printed 150 place cards and 4 were left over at the end of the night, tucked into my purse by mistake. I stood near the entrance for most of the evening, greeting people, checking names, directing them to tables. I wore a black dress I had bought on sale for $78. The tag said formal, but the fabric was thinner than it should have been. Inside, Ethan moved from table to table, shaking hands, laughing at things that weren't particularly funny but sounded convincing in the room. My mother floated beside him, introducing him to people as the founder, her hand resting lightly on his arm like she was presenting something she had helped build. At one point, I watched as she guided a man in a gray suit toward him. "This is Daniel Mercer," she said. "He's pledged $25,000 tonight." I recognized the name from the spreadsheet. Row 42. Confirmed. Payment pending. Ethan smiled, extended his hand, and said, "We're so grateful for your support. It means a lot." Later that night, after the last speech, after the applause that lingered just long enough to feel rehearsed, I found myself in the kitchen behind the ballroom. The air smelled like butter and dish soap. Plates stacked in uneven towers. A dishwasher hummed in the corner, steady and indifferent. I was scraping wax from the base of a candle holder with the edge of a fork. My mother walked in, heels clicking sharply against the tile. She didn't look at me right away. She was scrolling through her phone. "You should have worn something brighter," she said. "You blended into the background." I kept working. "It's easier that way," I said. She glanced up then, just briefly. "Yes," she said, "it is." A week later, Ethan's nonprofit was featured in a local magazine. 2-page spread. Professional photos. There was one image of him standing in front of a whiteboard, sleeves rolled up. Mid-explanation, the caption read, "Founder Ethan Carter outlines his vision." I had written that outline. I recognized the phrasing, the exact sequence of points. There was no mention of me, not even a footnote. I printed the article anyway, slid it into a folder labeled Press and added it to the archive I maintained for him. Date, source, circulation numbers, 187. Susan came in over the next 3 months from a single donor I had been quietly corresponding with, Margaret Holloway. She preferred email over phone calls, signed every message with her full name, asked specific questions about allocation, impact metrics, long-term sustainability. I answered everyone, tailed breakdowns, quarterly projections, line items down to the dollar. She replied once, after I sent a revised budget that reduced administrative overhead by 6.3%. "Whoever prepared this understands how to make money do actual work," she wrote. I didn't correct her assumption. I just sent the next report by the time the gala approached. The second one, the bigger one, the one with the ballroom and the microphones and the seating chart that took me 11 hours to finalize. Her pledge was confirmed $187,000. It was the largest single contribution Ethan's organization had ever received. He announced it in a meeting the week before. "Big news," he said, leaning back in his chair, hands folded behind his head. "We secured a major donor, 187. My mother clapped once, sharp and precise. "That's my son," she said. No one looked at me. I had sent the final confirmation email at 2:14 a.m., the night before. Subject line, "Pledge confirmation, Holloway Foundation." I remember the exact time because I stared at the timestamp for a long moment before closing my laptop. It was quiet in my apartment. The kind of quiet that feels like it has weight. I turned off the light and sat in the dark for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I went to bed, and a week later I stood in that ballroom, under those chandeliers, listening to my mother call me useless, in front of 83 people. Not one of them knew the numbers behind the night, not one of them knew my name. There's a specific kind of silence that follows something like that. It doesn't rush to fill the space. It settles. Like dust, my mother lowered the microphone with a small, satisfied movement as if she had just completed a thought that needed to be said out loud. A few people shifted in their seats. Glassware clinked softly. Someone at table 9 cleared their throat. Ethan didn't look at me. He was adjusting his cufflinks, eyes down, the corner of his mouth lifted just enough to pass for neutral. I stood there for 3 seconds. Then 4, then I reached for a champagne flute from the waiter who was still beside me. The glass was cold. Condensation gathered against my fingers, a thin line of water slipping down to my wrist. I took a sip. It tasted like nothing. On the stage, my mother continued speaking. Donor recognition, impact metrics, carefully practiced gratitude that moved from name to name in alphabetical order. The room relaxed again, the moment folding into the rest of the evening like it had always belonged there. I set the glass down on a passing tray. Then I stepped out. The hallway outside the ballroom was carpeted in a muted gray pattern that softened footsteps. The air was cooler, quieter. A framed abstract painting hung slightly crooked near the exit sign. I noticed it because I needed something exact to look at. I reached into my clutch and took out my phone. 11:42 p.m. I opened my email, scrolled past vendor confirmations, seating adjustment, a last-minute request for gluten-free meals at table 3. Then I opened the thread Margaret Holloway subject line, pledge confirmation, Holloway Foundation. I read her last message again, 4 lines, direct, precise. I'll be attending the gala in person. I prefer to meet the individual responsible for the financial structure you outlined. It reflects a level of discipline I rarely see. I had never answered that part, not directly. Inside the ballroom, applause rose again, muffled through the doors. I locked my phone, then unlocked it. My thumb hovered for a moment before I tapped her contact. There was no reason to hesitate. I typed slowly. No corrections. Margaret, this is Hannah Carter. I'll be at the gala tonight. If you're available, I'd be happy to meet. I read it once. Then I sent it, the message delivered instantly. 3 gray dots appeared within 8 seconds. I'm already here, she replied. Table 1. I looked at the closed ballroom doors. Then I went back inside. Table 1 sat 10 feet from the stage, slightly elevated, angled just enough that its guests never had to turn their heads fully to see what was happening. I had placed it there myself, 6 seats. White linen, low floral arrangement, white ranunculus and eucalyptus, kept intentionally short so sightlines stayed clear. 2 votive candles. Place cards printed on heavy stock, 120 pounds, soft matte finish. Margaret Holloway was in seat 3. I recognized her immediately, not from photos. She didn't keep a public profile, but from the way she held still while everything around her moved. Late 60s, maybe early 70s. Silver haircut just below the jaw. A navy dress with a clean neckline. No jewelry except a gold watch on her left wrist. She wasn't watching the stage. She was watching the room. I approached from the right, careful not to interrupt the server placing a fresh glass of water at her setting. The glass touched the table with a soft, precise sound. "Ems Holloway," I said. She looked up. Her eyes moved quickly. Face, shoulders, hands. The kind of scan that measures without appearing to. "You're Hannah," she said. Not a question. "Yes." She gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Sit." I did. Up close I could smell her perfume. Something subtle, almost dry like paper and cedar. "I read everything you sent," she said. Twice. On stage, Ethan was thanking a group of mid-tier donors, names I knew by heart. 5,000. $7,510. His voice carried easily, practiced, confident. Margaret didn't look at him. "You reduced administrative overhead from 18% to 11.7%, she continued. Line by line, you cut vendor redundancy, renegotiated 2 service contracts. Who approved those changes? I implemented them, I said. She watched me for a second longer. Without authorization? Yes. A server passed behind us, the faint scent of seared salmon trailing in the air. Plates shifted. Silverware touched porcelain in small, controlled sounds. "And the founder?" she asked. He reviewed the final numbers. "That wasn't my question." I let the silence sit. "Then no." She nodded once. Not surprised. On stage, my mother laughed lightly at something Ethan said, her hand resting against the podium like it belonged there. Margaret followed my line of sight for the first time. "That's your family," she said. "Yes, and you are." She didn't finish the sentence. "Not Liz said," her mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile, I noticed. I reached into my clutch and took out a folded sheet of paper. Not the full report, just 1 page. Clean, numbers only, revenue projections, allocation breakdown, a column on the right labeled variance, current versus proposed. I placed it on the table between us. She didn't touch it immediately. Walk me through this, she said, so I did, quickly, precisely. I pointed to the exact lines where funds were being overstated for optics, the 6.3% shift that made the programs look more efficient than they actually were. The donor communications that used rounded figures instead of exact ones. I corrected for that in the reports I sent you, I said. What's being presented publicly isn't inaccurate, it's just arranged. For effect, she said. Yes. She finally picked up the paper. Across the room, someone dropped a fork. The sound was sharp, brief, then gone. And your role in all of this, she asked. I built the system. I maintain it. I communicate with donors when needed. When needed, she repeated. When they ask questions that require specific answers. She looked back at me. And who answers the questions they don't know to ask? I held her gaze. I do. On stage, Ethan's voice shifted. I want to take a moment to recognize the people who made tonight possible, he said. My mother stepped closer to the microphone, already preparing the list. Margaret folded the paper once. Clean crease. Interesting, she said. She set it down beside her plate, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table. Because the structure you sent me, she continued, is the reason I wrote a check for $187,000. I didn't respond. She turned slightly in her chair, angling toward the stage now. And I've been listening very carefully tonight, she said. My mother began reading names, board members, advisors, strategic partners. The list moved steadily. My name didn't appear. Margaret's fingers rested lightly against the folded paper. Stay seated, she said, almost absent-mindedly. I'm not finished. On stage, the applause started again, polite, even. Controlled. Margaret didn't clap. She reached for her water instead, took a small sip and set the glass down with the same precise motion as before. Then she looked back at me. Timing matters, she said. I nodded. I know, and for the first time that night something shifted, not in the room, in the sequence of what was about to happen. My mother reached the end of her list with a small, practiced pause, the kind that invites applause before it even begins. And of course, she said, smiling out across the room, none of this would be possible without our founder, Ethan Carter. The room responded exactly as expected. Applause, measured but full. A few people stood. Chairs shifted back against the floor in soft, staggered sounds. Ethan stepped forward, one hand already raised in modest acknowledgement, the other brushing lightly against the edge of the podium like he needed the contact. Thank you, he said. This organization has always been about transparency, integrity, and making sure every dollar goes exactly where it's needed. Margaret exhaled once, not loudly. Just enough. Beside me, her fingers moved to the folded paper again, pressing it flat against the table. On stage, Ethan continued. When we say impact, we mean measurable results. Real numbers, real change. As Margaret stood, it wasn't abrupt. It was deliberate. Her chair moved back in a straight line, the legs gliding over the carpet with a muted resistance. A few heads turned immediately. Table 1 didn't move without being noticed. She didn't look at me. She walked 6 steps to the edge of the stage. I counted them without meaning to. A staff member moved instinctively to intercept, then stopped when she recognized her. Donors at her level didn't get redirected. My mother saw her first. There was a flicker, quick, controlled, but visible if you were watching closely. Margaret, she said into the microphone, her tone shifting half a degree warmer. We're so glad you could join us tonight. Margaret didn't smile. May I? She asked, gesturing lightly toward the microphone. It wasn't really a question. There was a brief hesitation. Less than a second, then my mother stepped back. Of course, she said. Margaret took the microphone. Adjusted it once, 2 fingers at the base, bringing it down slightly. The room quieted faster this time. I wasn't planning to speak, she said. Her voice carried without effort. But I've heard the word transparency used 3 times in the last 2 minutes, and I think it deserves a little precision. A ripple moved through the room, subtle. Chairs settling, glasses being set down. Ethan shifted his weight beside her, his smile holding but tighter now. Margaret continued. I represent the Holloway Foundation. We recently committed a $187,000 to this organization. There it was, the number spoken out loud, anchoring the room. A few heads turned toward Ethan again. Approval, recognition, the expected reaction. Margaret let it sit for exactly 2 seconds. I'd like to clarify why. Silence. She reached into her clutch and removed a folded sheet of paper, the same one. I approved this contribution based on a financial structure that demonstrated unusually high efficiency. Administrative overhead reduced from 18% to 11.7%. Vendor redundancies eliminated. Allocation ratios adjusted to favor direct program impact. She unfolded the paper with a single, clean motion. I was told this reflected the organization's current operating model. My mother's posture shifted, slightly. Her hand moved to the edge of the podium again. Ethan stepped closer to the microphone. "That's correct," he said smoothly. "We've worked very hard to refine." Margaret raised one hand, not high, just enough. He stopped. "I've spent the last 40 minutes listening," she said. "And I've reviewed your published materials again tonight. The numbers presented publicly do not match the structure I was given." The air in the room changed, not louder, tighter. A man at table 4 leaned forward, elbows on the table. Someone near the back set down a glass too quickly. The sound carried. My mother stepped in. "There may be some misunderstanding," she said, her voice still composed but thinner now. "We can certainly clarify." "There's no misunderstanding," Margaret said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She lifted the paper slightly. "The misunderstanding," she continued, "would be assuming this model came from the individual currently being credited for it." And then, for the first time, she turned her head, not toward Ethan, toward me. 83 people followed the movement. It wasn't immediate, it happened in waves. Front tables first, then the middle, then the back. Faces turning, one after another, until the entire room aligned on a single point. "Me, I didn't stand," Margaret spoke again. "The person who built this structure is in this room," she said. "She's the one who answered every question I sent. She's the one who corrected the projections. She's the reason I wrote that check." A pause, precise. "Her name is Hannah Carter." There was no applause this time, just silence. Ethan's expression didn't collapse, it held. But something underneath it shifted, like a foundation adjusting under weight it hadn't accounted for. My mother's hand tightened on the podium. The microphone picked up a faint, unintended sound. "Fabric against metal," Margaret continued. "I prefer to know who I'm trusting with my money," she said. "And I prefer accuracy when the word transparency is used on a stage." She lowered the paper. "If the current representation of your operations is the one you intend to maintain, the Holloway Foundation will be reviewing its commitment." The sentence landed cleanly, no emphasis. No dramatics, just consequence. A man at table 6 leaned back in his chair, exhaling audibly. Someone near the front whispered something sharp and quick. The room didn't erupt, it recalibrated. Ethan stepped forward again. "We appreciate your feedback," he said, voice steady but slower now. "And we can absolutely schedule a time to." "This isn't feedback," Margaret said, another small interruption. "Exact, it's a correction." She handed the microphone back to my mother, didn't wait for a response, and then she turned, not toward the exit, toward me. She walked the same 6 steps back, her pace unchanged, and stopped beside my chair. "Stand," she said quietly. I did. Up close, the room felt different, not louder, just more aware. Margaret placed a hand lightly against my arm, not guiding, just marking presence. "This is the person you should be asking your questions to," she said. Not into the microphone this time, but loud enough for the front tables to hear. That was enough. The rest of the room filled in the gaps on its own. I could feel it. The shift. Attention moving, recalculating, attaching itself somewhere new. On stage, no one spoke. For the first time that night, the silence wasn't empty, it was occupied. The rest of the night didn't end. It unraveled, not all at once. In small, precise shifts. At table 2, a woman I recognized as a recurring $15,000 donor turned her chair away from the stage and toward me. At table 5, a man in a charcoal suit pulled out his phone, opened something. Notes, maybe. And glanced between the stage and the paper still lying beside Margaret's plate. Conversations didn't start immediately. They resumed, quieter, narrower. Focused? My mother attempted to recover the room. She stepped back to the microphone, smoothed a hand over the front of her dress, and smiled. The same 3-second version. It held for 2. "Thank you, Margaret," she said. "We value all of our partners and—" Her voice faltered on the last word. Just slightly, she continued anyway. "As I was saying, this organization is built on collaboration, and we're always refining." A man near the front raised his hand. Not high. Just enough to interrupt the script. "Could you clarify the overhead numbers?" he asked, direct. No softness. My mother's smile didn't return. Ethan stepped in again, faster this time. "We can absolutely go into more detail after the program," he said. "Tonight is really about celebrating." "Transparency," the man said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A few people shifted in their seats. Someone nodded. Once. Then again. The word had changed weight. At table 1, Margaret remained seated, her posture unchanged, her attention no longer on the stage. She was looking at me, not expectantly, not urgently, just steadily. I sat back down. The program ended 7 minutes early. No announcement, no formal closing. It just thinned out. Applause came in scattered pockets instead of a unified wave. People stood at different times. Chairs moved out of sync. The first person approached our table before the lights fully brightened. "Ms. Carter," he said, addressing me, not the stage. "I'm David Klein. I'd appreciate a few minutes of your time." I nodded once. Of course, he didn't sit. He stood beside the table, pen already in hand, a folded program acting as a surface. "Your revised allocation model," he said. "Does it scale at the same efficiency past the $500,000 mark?" "Yes," I said. "With a marginal increase of 1.2% in administrative cost if vendor contracts remain fixed." He wrote that down. "Exactly. Can you send me the projections?" "Yes." He handed me his card. Thick, embossed. I felt the indentation under my thumb. "I'll expect it," he said. Then he moved on. 2 more followed. Then 3. Questions, not compliments. Numbers, not praise. At the edge of the room, I saw my parents standing close together, speaking in low, tight voices. My mother's hands moved more than usual. My father's didn't move at all. Ethan stood slightly apart from them, still in his place, near the stage, as if the evening might reset if he didn't step away from it. It didn't. A woman from the Arts Council approached my mother. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the shape of them, short, direct. Not deferential. My mother nodded too quickly, smiled too long. Across the room, a staff member began collecting unused programs from a side table. The stack was higher than it should have been. By 11:58 p.m., the room had lost half its people. By 12:11, only clusters remained. Conversations that would continue elsewhere, without the microphones, without the stage. Margaret stood once more, smoothing the front of her dress. "Send me the final numbers," she said to me, "the real ones." "I will." She nodded, and next time she added, "Put your name on your work." Then she left. No announcement, no attention drawn. Just a quiet exit through the same doors I had stepped through earlier that night. I stayed another 23 minutes and sweared what I could. Took down names. Accepted cards. At 12:34 a.m., I walked past the stage. The microphone was still there, lowered, slightly off-center. No one touched it. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 8:12 a.m. Nunnal numbers, voicemails, emails marked urgent. I let the first 3 calls go to voicemail, listened to them in order while standing in my kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee lingering because I had left the pot on too long. "Hi, this is David Klein. Following up from last night. Ms. Carter, this is Laura Bennett from the advisory board. We'd like to discuss." "Good morning, Hannah. I think there's been a misalignment in reported figures." Misalignment. I turned off the coffee maker. The click sounded louder than it should have. At 8:47, my mother called. I watched her name on the screen for a full ring before answering. "Hannah," she said, no greeting. "What happened last night was highly inappropriate." I didn't respond. "She blindsided us," my mother continued. "In front of donors, in front of the board. Do you have any idea what that looks like?" I said. "I do." A pause. "You should have come to us first," she said. "If you had concerns." "I sent the reports," I said. Silence, not long. "Just enough." "That's not the same as a conversation," she replied. "It is when the numbers are correct." Another pause. Longer this time. "We built that organization," she said, her voice tightening around the word we. "We gave it structure, visibility. You don't get to undermine that because you want recognition." I looked at the spreadsheet still open on my laptop. The same one, rows, columns, exact figures. "I didn't undermine anything," I said. "I corrected it." My father's voice came on the line, then quieter, more controlled. "You've complicated things," he said. "Donors don't like uncertainty, neither do I." That was the end of it. No raised voices, no final words, just a call that disconnected cleanly. By noon I had sent out 9 emails. Subject lines were direct. Attachments labeled clearly. No summaries beyond what was necessary. At 2:03 p.m. Margaret replied. "Received. This is what I expected, nothing more." I closed my laptop after that. The room was quiet again. The same kind of quiet as the night before, but without the weight. I stood there for a moment, then moved to the window. Outside, traffic moved in steady lines, predictable. Ordered. I thought about the ballroom, the microphone. The exact moment the room shifted. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. In my family, visibility had always been assigned, given, withheld, managed. But numbers don't work that way. They don't adjust for comfort. They don't rearrange themselves to protect a version of the story that looks better under soft lighting. They stay where you put them, exact, accountable, and eventually, if you let them, they speak for you.